Hi there. In this segment, I wanted to touch on just a couple more ideas on Salesforce for building materials and talk a little bit more about the Salesforce platform license that we've built this on top of, just to give you a little bit more detail on why this is different than what you might be familiar with Salesforce Sales Cloud or Salesforce Service Cloud. So let me just talk about a couple of quick things that I talked about in the previous video. But the first thing I want to start with is that if you've used Salesforce before, what you're probably used to seeing is this generic object that we call opportunities. And one of the things that I learned pretty quickly when I started talking with building material manufacturers and talking about their use of Salesforce, a lot of them told me that their use of the generic lead object and the generic opportunity object were just a little bit kludgy. And what they really meant was they didn't work the sort of generic way that Salesforce works, where something comes in as a lead. It might be, you might not know very much about it. It might be unqualified, and then you qualify it and convert it. And then from there, you work the opportunity. So what we began to see is that in the building materials space, you might have a very long sales cycle. And then you may also want to actually use Salesforce to manage either the implementation or installation, or just manage the entire process all the way through to delivery. So rather than using a generic lead and a generic opportunity and then maybe a generic quote and then a contract or a deliverable or an order, we decided to consolidate that into what we call the project record. Now, what's unique about the Salesforce platform that we built this on is the Salesforce platform license is designed to not have the generic sales objects available. So it doesn't have a generic lead and doesn't have a generic opportunity. It has what we call the core or the platform, which is accounts and contacts, and the ability to then add those elements that you need. And so if you look on my screen here, up here at the top, I have my accounts and contacts, which are part of the core capability. And that's like 90% of Salesforce are these two elements right here. And then in this example, we added projects, like I just mentioned, project relationships, which I went into in more detail in the previous video. We do have, in this example, a custom quote for this particular client. And you'll see here that because of the project relationships idea, they follow all the way through to the order. They have a design phase where they're interfacing with engineering. And the whole point is that's all using those objects that are available in that platform license. So the main idea here is that we're not using what I call generic sales objects that we then end up modifying. We are using those things that are specific for building materials or for architectural products. A couple other things I'll just mention. I mentioned this a little bit in the previous video, but if I do go into projects, for example, one of the things that you're probably working on, if you're working with us during the risk-free prototype, we've probably started on this already. If you haven't done the risk-free prototype yet, then you might be doing this in your project document. But you're starting to lay out the key details that you may want to capture about a project. And as I've said in other videos, those can be details that you have decided on, or they can be details from a project that we bring in from a project lead source like Dodge or BidClerk or whatever. And so depending on if you're feeding in from a source or you've defined what you want in the project object or both, you begin to develop those capabilities. And the same idea with the platform license applies here, which is we're taking this platform, we've tailored it generally for those manufacturers that sell and market building materials. But within that framework, you have unlimited flexibility in terms of defining the fields and the stages and the workflows and the statuses and all those things that will help you manage the workflow. Okay, so with that, the final thing I'll just touch on, a couple basic dashboard ideas, is that within within the Salesforce environment, we also have a lot of flexibility about tailoring dashboards. And as I said in the previous videos, you're going to be working on defining the results and the behavior that you want to generate. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about how to actually think about dashboards and how to use those tools to drive behavior. The one thing I want to leave you with right now is that you can have multiple dashboards for multiple audiences, And I want you to begin to think about the different audiences and the different metrics that you want to convey through your dashboard so that you can drive the behavior that we talked about. So I don't want to make this video too long. I just wanted to touch on a little bit of the back end for Salesforce for Building Materials so you understood why it's different, maybe not necessarily better, but if you've got any familiarity with Salesforce, a common question is, well, what makes this different? And the answer to that question is the project relationship concept. Okay, so with that, I'll just kind of mention a couple final things about Salesforce. If you're familiar with it, you know that it's a global platform used by millions of users. The other primary benefit that we see for Salesforce is how flexible it can be on the actual mobile device, so on your smartphone, iPad, whatever. And so mostly what we're showing in these videos are our browser interface, but don't forget that the real power of this is your team will have access to this information when they're in the field and when they're working on their smartphone. Okay, so finally, because this is not generic Salesforce, we're also cutting out a lot of what I call the noise or the bloat. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the lead and the campaign and opportunity, a lot of those generic objects that end up needing to be modified, we've eliminated a lot of those and we focus specifically on those things that are construction specific. And so most people value the power of Salesforce, but they want it to be simplified. And then finally, because we're not selling a lot of generic objects, there's a lower cost. So with that, thank you for taking a few minutes to watch this. If you have started the RFP, the risk-free prototype, thank you. If you're ready to start the risk-free prototype, there's a link to my calendar in the description. Click on that, grab a time. We'll talk through some of the details, find a convenient time to meet on a weekly basis with you and your team, and we'll get that process started. And finally, if you're not ready to start the risk-free prototype, again, in previous videos, we've talked about the project document. I have recommended that you have an internal meeting and maybe a weekly meeting or maybe every other week. So you need to work on that process. And we've got some tools to help you manage that meeting and manage the key decisions and the information that you might be capturing. But within all of that, if you have questions, shoot us an email, shoot us a quick comment. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to working with you.